To people who've lived in a rough neighborhood, places with gang violence and stuff, what challenges did you face on a day-to-day basis? What experiences have stayed with you? Lots of stuff that has been mentioned already. I will add having to walk several blocks to an area where delivery drivers, like pizza, would meet you because they would not go further into your neighborhood. It's same with cabs, Ubers. Knowing who belongs there is a big one. You know who the regular dealers are, etc. If you see a new person around, that raises suspicion because they could be trouble. Keeping the possessions you really cared about locked up, not in car, in home, because break-ins happen. I personally kept my Poe's car unlocked because I could not afford to replace broken window. Nothing in it was worth anything and it never has gotten stolen. Before I had a car, getting groceries was hard. Like another person said, grocery stores were not close by, just overpriced ghetto marts, corner stores. Even catching a bus was hard because there was less service in my area than in other parts of the city. Violence was present, but not something that bothered me. Maybe I was used to it. I have had an armed escort home several times when I found myself in the middle of a gang dispute. Each time a few fellows who knew I lived near called a truce of sorts and would walk me home. Not that I was particularly special. I think they did that to others who happened to be out late. Never giving passerbys on sidewalks a moment or a reason to continue a conversation. A frequent thing would be people heckling me as I walked to from school. Hey man, can I use your phone? I don't have a phone, without slowing down. And things like that. Don't stop, don't look, and don't say number. No and I don't have a phone are two very distinct sentences and the differences between them is important. Edit. I'm getting a million replies, so I guess this hit front page. So here's the scoop for those of you that don't understand the difference. I don't have a phone. I definitely have a phone and I will not let you use my phone. After I got jumped, I learned that looking stronger keeps people away a little bit. Always be ready for something to happen. I kept a constant look at IMP. Still have this habit. The ability to distinguish between gunshots, firecrackers, and a car turning over stays with me to this day, even as my neighborhood gets safer. I don't live in a bad neighborhood, but I do live in a pretty rural area where all three noises you just listed occur quite often. Don't get shot. I moved after I could hear regular gunfire, so I moved to a nice neighborhood and ironically 3 days after moving in, somebody smashed the passenger window of my car and stole $2.50 in change. The cops said they were looking for drug money and yet I had just moved out of drug central in my city and never had anyone break into my car. Go figure. You don't break in where you get your score. LOL. Didn't live in one of those areas, but frequently worked in them. I worked for a government program which provided certain home improvements at no cost to those income qualified. Windows, doors, insulation, roofs. Because of the nature of the program, I often worked in bad areas and a lot of Section 8 projects. We have a generator on the back of our truck that we use daily. The power supply in most of these rundown homes wasn't enough to support our tools. As you can imagine, the generator is pretty loud. A lot of the time, you'll hear it sputter and kick on and off. This usually meant some debris dirt got into the fuel filter. No problem. Clean it out and start it back up again. One morning, we fire up the generator and get to work. While I'm 12 featuring up on a ladder, installing a bathroom fan vent, I hear the generator start to slowly quiet down. I roll my eyes because I know I'll have to get down, go out front to the truck and clean the filter. But since at that particular moment I wasn't using a tool, just a cork gun, I figure frick it, I'll do it when I'm done here. But then the generator makes a fainter noise, and gets fainter and fainter. I knew something was up. I get down from the ladder and go out front. About 5 houses away on the sidewalk are 2 gentlemen, trying their best to run away with our generator while it was still on. The thing weighs about 300 pounds and it awkward as frick to carry, even with 2 people. The strain and back crippling run they were doing was impressive. I really couldn't even be mad. I caught up with them, tried to stop them. One guy had a screwdriver he was threatening me with. I backed off and called the cops. They caught up with them a block later. They weren't hard to find. They ended up getting charged with robbery and both went to the hospital. They both had severe burns on their arms and legs from the exhaust on the machine rubbing up against them as they made their great escape. From there on out the machine was chained to the truck. How normal it seemed until I was out from under that. You grow up knowing how to stay off the radar and not bother the wrong people. You see wild, crazy, scary things on the regular, and learn to keep your mouth shut and pretend you didn't. You are just a kid, like any other kid, but you have to be preternaturally aware of the relationships and hierarchies and happenings around you all the time to make sure you don't end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. For example, there was a guy who let his big mean dogs, I don't remember the breed, run loose in the neighborhood, but the dogs respected boundaries in terms of how close you could get to their house before you got your throat torn out. Stay far enough aware and they just sat watching you, with the occasional menacing growl. I spent the year we lived there thinking it was perfectly normal that I couldn't walk home from school on that one side of the street on penalty of death. It's just what happens. It's just your normal. This really hit when I went to college. So many things that I thought was normal was absolutely not. I talked about certain experiences. Some I even found funny, but they would look horrified and say things like "I'm sorry you had to go through that." I didn't even know how to respond. Like none my friends from the hood would even think twice about that stuff. Couple years ago I was leaving my house for uni when I heard a huge bashing sound coming from my neighbor's house, who I didn't know well but had always seen around and chatted to occasionally. I lived with my bro and it was a rough neighborhood with lots of break-ins and fights, so I always tried to keep my head down and be polite. Anyway, I had a look and saw a guy, who later turned out to be a plainclothes policeman, with a battering ram breaking into the house. The police then swarmed the house and removed about 4 women, who looked like they had been abused, a whole bunch of dudes, and a crap ton of drugs and weapons. Turns out they were running a brothel and had been monitored by police for months. I knew something dodgy was going on because guys would come and go in the middle of the night and could always smell weed, but I had no idea it was that serious. Turns out they were keeping the women hooked on drugs and threatened them if they ever leaves the house. Scary stuff. Was always polite to them and kept my head down whenever possible. This was in the UK, but I guess the same thing would work anywhere else. The biggest thing for my ignorant teenage self was that nobody would want to drive me home because they'd be too scared. Once a friend's car broke down in my neighborhood and got guns pulled on him. Guess who never got rides again after that? Day to day isn't terrible. Keep your head down and keep moving. Also be polite to your neighbors and you won't have any real trouble. Only real experience that has stayed with me is that when I hear yelling shouting outside I don't react anymore. Yeah, I learned early on to just keep my head down. If there's some fight or commotion, just keep on walking. Don't stop. Don't interact. Moving out of there really made me numb to the minor bickering of others. You're always slightly on guard. Always keeping your doors locked. Your sense of relaxation and safety isn't fully there. Not too long ago someone walked into my neighbor's house about 20 feet from my front door and tried to steal their 6-year-old child. My story is somewhat funny. I used to live in the poor cheap prostitute area of Montreal. One day, my mom came to pick me up. I was wearing Bermuda shorts with an oversized t-shirt that was stained. Was going to help her paint her living room. I'm waiting on the street corner and a car pulls up that looks like my mom's. I bend down to look at the driver to make sure it's my mom before I hop in. It's her, so I get in the car. Next thing I know, some girls start running towards us, screaming that I stole her client and that her daddy will come for me. I told my mom to GTFO and I moved shortly after. Plot twist, your dad regularly picks up hoes in that car. Never lived in one, but I was a mailman in a really bad neighborhood for a couple years and saw a lot of interesting things. Drug dealing and robbery was rampant. I kept my mouth shut and the drug dealers in that neighborhood made sure I wasn't ever messed with. Since I delivered the paychecks and welfare checks, I wasn't to be touched. That's how they made their money. So it made perfect sense to protect me. I never had anyone give me any serious trouble. Couple of verbal spats here and there, but the ones I had to legitimately fear were the ones I was cool with. They let me do my job. I let them do theirs. I felt like an extra on the set of The Wire. That reminds me of one of my uncle's stories. He was a power line worker in LA for a few decades, which meant he had to fix power lines in all the rough areas, South Central, Compton, etc. When I was a kid I asked him if he was ever scared in those places. He said frick no. Those people aren't stupid. They aren't gonna kill the dude giving them power. I know it's been said a few times, but absolutely. Keep your head down and be polite as can be to your neighbors. Lots of the tougher dudes I warmed up to live with their elder but if not it was their single parent. Man, be nice to them, help them out, and don't ask BS questions or get too friendly with the troublemaker in the home. They see you respecting their elder. That's huge. You don't need to be all chummy with them other than to show them simple respect too. Might be because I was white in a Hispanic black neighborhood, but making eye contact of any kind meant it was time to fight. Yep, this was how it is when we'd play ball too. We always left when certain dudes started showing up. No eye contact, no crap talking. Keep your head down, mind your business and try to get out. My dad was punched in the face as he passed a gang, and was assaulted on at least one other occasion. I was almost mugged twice, but I managed to avoid it. Me and my friends would alert each other when bad characters were around. We all carried pepper spray always. Our neighborhood went through phases. It wasn't always bad, but it went through years where it was pretty dangerous. Sounds like my city. Most recent near miss was Friday for me, so not going out in the dark until I need to or forget how crap this area is. Little in the way of gang violence in the UK, but mugging is freaking rife right now. Didn't make eye contact with anyone walking down the street, especially when there's a crazy homeless person. Went straight home after school, etc. I never wore anything flashy, and mostly never wore makeup to look as unattractive as possible to not get unwanted attention. Same goes for my clothing style. Basically just try to be invisible. Going for a run in my old neighborhood was impossible. Hated going to the store walking for fear of getting chased by a dog. Thankfully I've since moved. Getting to and from school was a nightmare because of aggressive stray dogs that were always wandering the fricking neighborhood. Seeing strange crap like people screaming and fighting in the streets, crapping, busting up windows and cars wasn't uncommon. If you heard gunshots in the distance, you went inside. If you were inside and heard them getting close, you moved to the lower floor until you didn't hear them no more. If you're out after dark or, as a girl, out alone, carry a blade. Minding your own business and being cool with the neighbors was a huge part of getting by day to day, though people will always want to know your business. On the upside, the neighborhood generally was aware of who belonged there and who didn't. Even the derelicts made a point to look out for weirdos that didn't belong and tried to look out for the kids. That's because they don't want the other derelicts moving into their territory and selling their crap. If you didn't maintain your area, they'd take it from you and wouldn't be keen on giving it back. Hillbilly white trash trailer park sort of rough. There's often wondering if that gunshot was redneck fun. Someone saw a possum, psychosis, or are we gonna be on the news tomorrow? Same with is that the couple that fights and breaks crap every night, or a different couple, and I'm hearing domestic violence, also being terrified to walk to a friend's because if you accidentally get too close to anyone's house they come running, sometimes armed, like a bat out of heck. But I can make moonshine and a mean fried chicken, so worth it? Day to day isn't bad. It's watching a neighborhood you grew up in and riding your bike in turn into something that makes you lock your car 10x just to be sure. In my neighborhood within a mile from me there were constant drug busts, beatings and murders. Even a woman who burned her baby in a burn barrel and dumped the ashes behind her home. It's learning at a young age the difference in a gun and firework when you've never even seen a gunshot. It's watching your parents who lived there for 40 years get robbed 4x the week they move. Even their air conditioning unit that was bolted to the ground was stolen. It's depressing. My dad stayed in a hotel overnight once on his way to his parents' house for Thanksgiving. In the morning he stopped to get gas, and when he got out got jumped by 5 guys who misread the back of his jacket and thought he was a part of some opposing gang. Then the gas station attendant, who was a 6'something black guy with a baseball bat, came out and scared them off by hitting the bat on the ground. Dad ended up with his jaw shattered and had it wired shut throughout Thanksgiving and Christmas. I grew up with drive-by shootings and gang activity in general. I feel like a lot of important childhood memories are interlaced with weird neighborhood crap. The day we got our first puppy, my friend across the street pulled a gun on his dad. When the cops showed up, he ran down the street and turned the gun on himself. Everyone was fine that day, but I'll never forget having a new puppy and not being able to take it to the bathroom because we could get shot. I also learned to treat everyone with respect. People were stabbed to death next door. Drive-bys hit the house 2 doors down. No one ever shot us though. People looked out for us. In junior high I was chased home often by men yelling that they'd pay me for my services. In high school my family worked nights and I was home alone. At this point my friend across the street just got out of prison and I was home alone. He called in a favor with the Hells Angels and they patrolled my street at night. My mom said oftentimes she'd come home just as 2 motorists would drive away. They protected me for a few years. That's cool as frick that your buddy would call up the Hells Angels to post up outside your house. Edit. Wow, I've never got this many upvotes. Thank you. I'm from Miami, specifically Miami Gardens, North Miami Beach, which has a ridiculously high crime rate. I didn't have a social life from elementary to most of high school because my parents made me stay inside. There were a few things that stuck with me. 1. The world is pretty quiet. In my hometown, there were sirens and helicopters nearly 24/7. When we finally moved away, it was something of a shock at how quiet everything was. It honestly felt like I was on a vacation for so many months after we moved. 2. The smell of weed makes my stomach turn to this day. It was always in the air and my parents just told little kid me that it was goat cooking. They didn't tell me the truth till after we had moved. 3. A very distinct memory I have of Miami is one day my dad was driving me to school. As we turned a corner only a couple of blocks away from our house, we came upon yellow police tape. Laying in the middle of the street was a hazardously covered body. That image always comes to mind whenever Miami comes up. 4. Another memory. The house across the street was a notorious drug house and many wanted people. Murderers and rapists among them hung out there. One of the residents was a skinny black lady. She came banging on our door one day. My mother opened the door to her holding what was essentially the skeleton of a toddler. The poor baby was so weak and emaciated she hardly looked alive. My mother told me to call 911. And the medics afterwards told us that if we had waited even a day longer, the child would have died. When I first moved out, I lived in a not so great neighborhood. I stayed at my girlfriend's house most of the time anyway, so not a big bother to me. Well, one morning I show up to work and everyone acts shocked to see me. I get a couple of glad you're okays and one thought you were dead. What? Turns out a kid my age, of my ethnicity, was shot and killed in my apartment complex the night before. Everyone I worked with automatically assumed it was me, so there's that. Just don't go out after dark alone and walk fast. I did get scared hearing shouting at night, plus domestic arguments. They all really triggered me because I got attacked once or twice. I had a weapon by my bed, so sleeping is a challenge. Not me, but I know a bloke who had to rip up product boxes they throw out on the curb for collect. So if they buy a new TV, they tear the box apart and throw it away piece by piece. This was so your house didn't get broken into. Also purposely buying a used car with dents and bumps, so stealing would not be as attractive. People are still really protective of animals. Whenever my wife and I come home, our beagle screams and yells in excitement, which sounds like she's in pain. We met every one of our neighbors within about a week, all of them asking, "You beating the dog?" Everyone seemed to keep an eye on our dog and watched to see how we treated her. I don't know if that is wholesome or not. I recently read about a guy who would carry his laptop in a special thin backpack he made and wore under his coat so he could walk to work through a bad neighborhood without being robbed of it. 1. Group of young, loud guys coming towards you. Cross the street. They are going to rough you up or grope you, or worse if it's nighttime. 2. Don't walk on the curb. Too easy for cars full of dickheads to pull up and grab you if you're that close to the street. Plus they used syringes in the gutter. 3. Stay away from the doors and windows when the police show up in your street. Stray bullets. 4. Mum is a goddamn looky-loo. Get her off the dang porch when someone is actively torching a car in front of the house, since people don't tend to like witnesses to their crimes. 5. If there's been a spate of drive-bys in your area, don't show up at the latest one. They'll deploy the riot police if the crowd is big enough. and that just results in dangerous clashes. It also creates a bigger crime scene, closing off main arterial roads in your suburb for a day or so. 6. Keep your head down. You didn't see crap until the police showed up. You didn't notice anything suspicious. You don't know that guy. Your neighbor seemed pretty normal. You slept through the whole incident. The retribution is real and they'll take out anyone remotely suspected of providing information. I lived in Hackney, East London in the 90s. It was pretty bad. One night I was walking home and there was a guy just lying in the middle of the street. He looked dead. People were walking past him and what's worse was that he was lying right outside a busy, well-lit taxi office and the staff weren't doing anything. My friend and I stopped and checked him out. He was young, black-clad. When we touched his shoulder, he murmured something and my friend said, "It's okay. We're helping you." We looked for injuries but saw none. Then I said, "He's very tidy. I don't think he is a drug addict." My friend, stupidly, put his hand in the guy's pocket, pulled out a diabetic alert thing and we also saw he had a hearing aid. Poor man. Poor man had had a diabetic episode and passed out. We called an ambulance and had very strong words with the staff in the taxi office who just looked at us like we were the dumb ones. Also, one day I saw an old man arguing with a young man outside my flat. The young man was pleading with the old one. "Please uncle, please." Thought no more about it till 2 days later. The lift kept going past my floor, 17th, and stopping on the 19th. When the lift doors opened I saw the door to one of the flats on that floor was always open. Turned out it was uncle's flat. The young man had killed him shortly after that argument because uncle wouldn't lend him money. Uncle was lying on the floor just beyond that open door. Uncle was a local moneylender, and he was murdered for his cash. I grew up in Flint, Michigan, which, before the poisonous water, was known for its crime rates, gang violence, etc. Well, both of my parents were cops and this was at the rise of social media. So when all my friends were making MySpaces, I couldn't because if someone found out about my family and where we lived we could be attacked. So I never had social media as a teen. And I still don't have things like Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Don't get involved in the hard drug trade. I don't know of many people getting shot over weed, but anything that is addictive is a bad call. Also don't screw over anyone money-wise. Sometimes it's easier to be a woman than a man. I was kept out of a lot of trouble simply due to being female. I wasn't a threat, so no one fricked with me. I kept my head down and my eyes out of other people's business. I was also never the first to call 911 if there were gunshots. It was weird growing up and moving out of my neighborhood. Gunshots were so normal to me that my first 4th of July in a better neighborhood, there weren't any gunshots and I kinda missed them. The experience that will stick with me the most was when, during my senior year in HS, I was working at a small music shop. One day in walks this group of about 6 guys, most of them teens. With them was a kid no older than 8. While casually walking around looking at CDs, this kid was using a fingernail file to file down a plastic toothbrush into a prison shank. This hit me pretty hard because at first I thought that it was fricked up that these teens were teaching a kid this. Then I realized that it was probably an important life skill for him and that there was a very real chance that he would have to put that skill to use at some points in his life. These kids were like the most fricked up Boy Scout troop ever. I remember the kids in my middle school learning to do that with plastic forks, lighters, and some filing. The school banned butter knives or cake cutters, which always made me laugh. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.